Lightning like Steve McQueen. I'm in the fast lane when the light turns green. And I built tough, I ain't nothing but grit. Cause I made rugged blood, sweat, and spit. Yeah, like a horse I fly. Better push yourself in for a bumpy ride. I like to play hard, but I work harder. And I weather the storm cause I'm built stronger.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Morning Show, the top morning show in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines, and most importantly, provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak to transportation professionals on this show, as well as my twice-a-week long-form podcast, because I want to talk to the individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve, so you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. All right, it is Thursday out here today, and it is a busy week for us. It's been a really good rebound week from a freight volume perspective out there. You know, it was a rough January, I think, overall, from like opportunities, because our quotes were down, everything was kind of down, and that kind of tends to happen out there in the overdimensional and flatbed world. January and February and everything is kind of slow out there, and then things start really kind of ramping up mid to late March, early April, and everything. And but this week, though, it's been a great week. We've been able to come through with our customers on a couple of last minute shipments, because we're doing a lot of job site work and everything, and not everything needs to be on a RGN or something like that. And we were actually able to come through and move an expedited Sprinter van for them yesterday for some critical components that they needed to get out to the job site. So that was pretty sweet to be able to continue to do that out there. And yeah, I'm just trying to stay as optimistic as possible out there, and knowing that, it takes a really long time to build stuff up. And I'm just going to continue to show up every single day, put in the work, hold myself accountable. And, because it's the most important on the days that you don't want to do it. And, those days happen to everybody, right? They happen to me, and it's not easy, and I'm just going to continue to show up. But getting those wins, though, help, right? Getting those freight wins from those customers out there, especially last minute ones. I love it at the end of the day, and I'm going to keep showing up, keep putting in the work. Corey Buchan, what is going on, man? Over on YouTube, he says, happy Thirsty Thursday, free snow cones in Montana. Oh man, no thank you here at all. I am thoroughly enjoying not having any of that stuff down here. We actually got, it's crazy though, is there is legit snow surrounding the Phoenix Valley right now. It's wild seeing it up there in the mountains, and it's sticking around too, because we had some really bad weather for the last couple of weeks, and yeah, it's interesting to see it here sitting out there. But yeah, you guys, we got some articles to break down here on the show today. And we got a new podcast dropping here tomorrow. And I'll be releasing that promo post here later on today. But yeah, you guys, all the links to the articles that I break down, I will put up on the Freight Coach YouTube channel, as well as the Coffee with the Freight Coach audio only replay of this, which is available almost immediately after the show. Anyways. Yeah, we got some good feedback on the show from yesterday, though, having my man Cody back on, talking about all the stuff down there that happened with the border processing down at the border, excuse me. Yeah, it got some really good feedback on that show, because I don't think a lot of people knew about that. And then frankly, I don't think a lot of people knew that there could be a system that could be shut down on that. And yeah, it's a wild concept to think that there is a lot of stuff out there that could happen to, impede the freight flow. And really it's about going through a lot of these situations at the end of the day, and, making yourself more prepared out there. Right. Cause I think that, I love when things go good in business, right? I don't know anybody who doesn't enjoy it, but I think like when there's like delays and backups and all of that stuff, it makes you better in the long term, right? Because learning these situations is only going to help you in the future, because it's like, I swear, the more and more I get into business, and especially in transportation, I realize how little I actually know, and how much I have to learn out there, because it's challenging, right? Well, at least it is for me at the end of the day. And but I also look at it as an opportunity to get better, and an opportunity to really, because like at the end of the day, it helps me out for future prospecting, right? It helps me out for future freight that I'm moving out there, and it's going to help me in the event when I get more customers. And yeah, so hold on, one, you guys. Speaking of customers, I got one reaching out to me right now. I got to take care of this, you guys, because where else can you guys watch somebody win freight live on the show and actually execute their freight business live on a show? Because that's what I'm doing right now. Give me just 1 second. Here we go. Here we go. Perfect. All right, you guys, we got some freight picking up out in Tennessee today. So we're organizing that. We're moving some power only today out there. Nick Isabella, what is up, my dude? He says, let's go, Big Chris. Stephen Tittle, good morning. Let's go. He says, Bill McIntyre, good morning over on YouTube. James Courier, he says, attaboy, freight coach for the W. That's right. He's over on YouTube as well. Yeah, man. Again, I want to just bring the realities of this business and out there, to you guys, because hell, I'm just here to show you guys what you got to go through out there. Opportunities are going to come. And, again, you guys, I'm actually moving freight every single day. And I'm actually out there cold calling and prospecting. And I just want to put my perspective out there about what I see things going on from somebody who's actually in the day-to-day out here. And, there's no speculation on my part, frankly, you guys. It's legitimately the decisions that I'm making that are going to shape the future of my company. Zena, what is up? Good morning to you, Zena. Jonathan, what is going on? Happy Thursday, everyone. Both of them are watching over on LinkedIn. All right, let's get into some articles here, you guys, because I might have to wrap up the show a little bit early today because I got some freight moving on. And you know what? That's what we got to do. First article, JOC.com. FMC rules for truckers in chassis dispute case with ocean carriers. The Federal Maritime Commission has ordered ocean carriers stop mandating that cargo owners and their truckers use specific chassis on merchant haulage business, a decision that could shake up how containers are transported in the U.S. This closely watched ruling issued Tuesday upholds a decision made by a hearing examiner in 2023 in favor of the American Trucking Associations. The Ocean Carriers Equipment Management Association appealed that decision to the full FMC. At issue are two different arrangements made between cargo owners and ocean carriers. In so-called carriers haulage agreements, the ocean carrier is responsible for door-to-door transportation. In merchant haulage agreements, the ocean carrier is only responsible for the ocean and the port, while the cargo owner handles the container's inland move. The hearing examiner had ruled that ocean carriers violated the U.S. Shipping Act of 1984 when requiring truckers to use specific intermodal equipment under merchant haulage agreements. The examiner also found that chassis rental rates for merchant haulage went up 35% between 2018 and 2020 and 90% between 2013 and 2020 in one U.S. region, while they remain virtually unchanged for cargo owners out there. The FMC agreed the practice of ocean carriers were unreasonable and not necessary to ensure the smooth flow of cargo. In most situations, motor carriers do not have a viable alternative to paying the price for designated IEPs that they impose, because chassis are a necessity, and substituting trucker-owned wheels is generally not economically feasible, the FMC wrote. These restrictions are also effectively shut out of potential chassis providers, competitors, or at least markedly impede their ability to compete for motor carriers out there. And then the FMC's ruling that ocean carriers violated the Shipping Act was restricted to 5 locations at the heart of the complaint: the port of LA, Long Beach, and Savannah, and inland ramps in Chicago and Memphis. The commission out there remanded that the case to the original hearing examiner to settle other issues not covered in the initial ruling. Jonathan Eason, the chair of Intermodal Carrier Conference conferences within the ATA, said the FMC's ruling affirmed the group's contention the ocean carriers were acting in violation of the Shipping Act. And then it says what we expect is that the ocean carriers will abide by the cease and desist order issued by the commission to comply with the law. And then, it seems to me that the ports make it so much harder to actually do stuff than it should be, right? Because I've learned a lot about the ports. I am not an ocean freight or a drayage expert by any stretch of the imagination out there, but it seems like it's so much harder to move stuff in and out of the ports, and that it continues to get harder, right? Like there's so many rules out there. I don't know. This is like, this is another one of those reasons why I think it's so important to choose your niche, because these individuals that are out there trying to sell and say that they can move ocean freight, or drayage, how many of them are familiar with any of this stuff that goes on? I would argue you have to be in that to actually even know what to do in this situation, right? Because and this is what goes on if it's all running smooth. But what if there's a hang up? What if there's a delay and everything else? This is why I'm telling you guys, choose your niche. Choose your niche. And then it goes on to say rejecting claims of the supply chain impact. The OCEMA previously argued that if the FMC affirmed the ruling, it would lead to more chassis shortages out there because it would not know how many units to station in ports and rail terminals. If units are not positioned correctly across the U.S., then there could be a repeat of pandemic-driven disruptions. The commission rejected these arguments, saying that they do not point to the statistics or expert evidence indicating the likelihood that the scenario they paint of supply chain disruption, inadequate chassis supplies, or other difficulties stemming from the cease and desist order will actually occur while a period of readjustment out there. And then it goes on to say I'm just skipping around because there's just a bunch of legal jargon out here. And then charging with provider supplies of chassis will not alter traffic volume or demand. The same number of chassis will still be required, but who supplies them will be open to competition, it added. I just feel like there's so many hoops that you got to jump through here just to grab a fucking container at the end of the day. I think that, and I had my guy Mason on the show with IMC companies, and he really explained a lot of this. And they have they were talking about appeal program, I think is what they had called it out there. And we're talking about this to kind of speed up the ports a little bit, right? Because they do talk about how they are so antiquated, how it does cause a lot of confusion, how there is such a simple way to kind of liquidate the freight that is sitting in some of these containers out there. So those were a couple of good conversations that we had out there, you guys. And Mason's with the IMC companies, and I had him come on and talk about the delays at the ports originally back in I think it was 2022. And then I've had him on in a couple of other instances because there's just so much that goes on with some of these situations. And how are you going to even know this unless you're actively moving this freight at the end of the day? But it seems like there is so much that goes on to slow down the flow of goods at some of these ports. And that is what makes some of these situations, like you go back to, the pandemic era, why I think there was such a big issue with some of these things at the end of the day is because there's so many hoops you have to jump through just to put a container on a chassis and have that chassis delivered inland and then taken care of, right? So that article, you guys, was from the JOC, and it is the FMC rules for truckers and chassis disputes with ocean carriers. I don't think that we need to make things any more complex than it really needs to be. And it seems like that is just a given when it comes to some of these agencies out there who are at the government level. They just love making things more challenging for all of us. All right. Next article we are going to break down here is from fleetowner.com. And this is talking about the hours of service rules in the West Coast states could negatively impact interstate trucking. If you guys aren't aware of what hours of service are, we need to be aware of that, right? Ladies and gentlemen, I would definitely do some research on hours of service if you're not familiar with them. Robert Cowton, what is up, man? It says, morning, Chris. We can't fix long load times for inland freight. Never mind port issues. I believe many shippers have no intention to speed up loading and unloading times just the way they do business. Yeah, man, that's interesting, right? I you know, I think this is also another reason why I only move in the open deck world for the most part is because the stuff's generally doesn't fall into dealing with a lot of those delays out there. When it comes down to loading and offloading times taking long because, oh, excuse me, geez, that came out of nowhere. Um, I dealt with that a lot more in the dry van world, right? Especially in food and everything else. And, drivers showing up to some large retail operations and then not having them offloaded for 6, 7, or 8 hours because they just didn't want to offload you, right? And then anytime you'd reach out for feedback, they just wouldn't reply. And the general sentiment is you're just going to have to deal with it. So I can't argue with you at all here, Robert, by any stretch of the imagination that some people just operate that way. Not everybody, right? Now, I want to be very, very clear about that. Not everybody operates in that manner. There are a lot of people who are very dialed in to their stuff. And I love working with those shippers who are very dialed in. It's quick load, quick offload time. All right. Back to the article here. As much as things change, they stay the same. The longstanding joke in our industry is that we face the issues we face now are basically the same 20 years ago. If you left trucking at some point in the past 2 decades and just got back, you can pick up right where you left off. That is so damn true at the end of the day. So my dad started driving trucks back in the 70s, and he drove until I think it was like 2010 or 2012 or something like that. And said the exact same thing because like up until before he passed away, I wanted to get him on the podcast to talk about this, right? Because trucking in the 70s and the 80s is vastly different than what it is right now. And he legitimately said, he's like, nothing's changed, Chris. It's literally been the same. All the same issues that we had back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s are still going on today because nobody wants to change. My godfather was that literally, like he drove in the 70s and the 80s, and then he didn't drive in the 90s and the 2000s. And then he got back into the industry in like 2021 just to drive because he's retired and he wanted something to do because he was doing local dirt work in Minnesota. And he said the same thing. He's like, it's literally, they've made it harder to do the job now because of all the electrical components that you have to do, i.e. e-logs and everything else. You can only start your truck at a certain time and yada, yada, yada. And it's like nothing has changed is what he said. If anything, they've made it harder on the truck drivers out there. And then it goes on to say in this article, you may have thought the California meal and rest break rules for drivers were put to bed a couple of years ago. It was a significant industry win when the FMCSA ruled that the federal regulations preempted California rules and therefore were unenforceable under the Trump administration. I probably got dinged for even mentioning that guy's name right there. Anyways, but when you think about those contested rules and behind us, they continue to rear their ugly heads. In August, the FMCSA announced that it would begin accepting petitions for waivers from its decision to preempt state meal and rest break laws, specifically the California and Washington break mandates. You could have timed this with an egg timer as both states submitted petitions for waivers to implement their meal above the rest break laws that were out there. We can add waiver petitions to death and taxes as few guarantees in life as the trucking. Okay, that's kind of funny. In the scope of our industry, this would be fine if the West Coast was an inland. However, California and Washington are part of a broad network of interstate commerce, and then the need to standardize trucking rules, which at the end of the day, there should be a set rules across the nation, right? Like, I don't understand why, 2 states that come to mind with me right now are Oregon and in New Mexico. Historically, a lot of the drivers that I work with do not want to go anywhere near those 2 states. And that's above California, right? Because of permits and everything else that kind of go along with it. They're just not easy to work with. And, I truly feel that way. Why isn't there a set standard? Right? Like, why isn't there a set standard in the lower 48, at least, about transporting, hours of service, and all that stuff? Anyways, the world has gotten smaller and interstate freight differs from what it once was. Having a patchwork of state laws that would affect the daily movement of freight would be inefficient at best and chaos at worst. Time and time again, the supply chain has demonstrated that one singular standard of regulations is imperative to the practical and proficient means of delivering freight. The states must demonstrate that their meal and rest breaks are a safe or safer than the federal standard, making the proposition difficult and one for which the FMCSA's preemption makes the most sense. Generally speaking, these rules would take on a life of their own once they become enforceable. Consider a professional truck driver operating in interstate commerce required to travel north from Washington, D.C. up the East Coast. The number of state border crossings would make a federal standard a necessity. Parking to accommodate these breaks would become even more of an endangered species than it already is. And the shoulders of highways on and off ramps would become even more populated with trucks, essentially requiring more daily stops will force drivers to find parking in areas not traditionally made for commercial motor vehicles to take these breaks. Ultimately, the state would not need to, ultimately, the state meal and rest breaks would undermine safety by enforcing drivers to stop driving at times. And yeah, and that's another thing too, right? How many people are even aware of this? I would love to know how many people out there, brokers or carriers who aren't based in some of these states, are aware that these state laws are required. I just don't understand why we have to make this so fucking complex at the end of the day. I really don't. It seemed like, and here's another thing too. I don't understand why, and again, drivers, correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't understand why you can't, when you're waiting at a shipper or receiver getting loaded, why you can't take your break right then. Right. And drivers, if you don't want to do that and you want to keep that the same, I understand. I'm just genuinely curious, right? Because I truly think, like, if you're shut down, and I know that you're technically on the clock in that situation, but like, why you would have to shut down if you're already sitting for 2 hours to get loaded or offloaded? Why can't you take your break at that time, right? Or shut your clock off? I would always want that. I've always wondered that, why you can't shut your clock off. And I know that there's sleeper berth rules and everything else, but why isn't that an industry standard? If your truck is stopped, why you can't be technically off the clock at that time? And if you could take rests and everything else during those moments to whether extend your clock or shorten your clock. I feel like giving the driver more power over how they manage their clock would be more beneficial for the driver community, and why that couldn't just be a law kind of across the board at the end of the day. And, because it goes on to say that federal hours of service rules aim to ensure that the professional drivers operate safely between states and eliminate any unnecessary confusion. Knowing that is, yeah, and I would agree with that, right? Like, it should be very simple to operate that, to where it's like, oh, I'm in Kansas now, I got to do this way, and then, oh, I'm down in Oklahoma, I got to do it opposite. Like, I feel like it should be a set way across the board. The FMCSA should probably look into this a little bit more and eliminate any states from implementing their own rest laws that would impede anything at the end of the day. I just don't think that. I don't know. Maybe I'm overlooking things. Maybe I'm looking into things wrong, but I just feel like a set standard across the board would be extremely beneficial for all drivers involved, and then giving them the opportunity to manage their clock the way that they seem fit for themselves and their business. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that last part. I'm not sure, but I would assume that would make it a lot, and that would be more driver friendly. That article is from the fleetowner.com, and that is hours of service rules in the West Coast states could negatively affect interstate trucking. LaShawn Brown says, I took my break at shippers and receivers all the time when I drove. It didn't matter what state, and trust me, most, if not all, drivers do. Perfect, man. I didn't know that. I've never driven a truck in the E-log era days or ever. I've never held a CDL, so I would have assumed that way. But, some of the conversations that I've had with the freight that I move inside of my brokerage is the drivers that I've worked with didn't do that, and then they would always want to stop and take a 30-minute break. But that's good to know, man. Again, at the end of the day, got to do what's best for you. I would love to see more of that out there, where, if that's not the case, for example, that more drivers had more autonomy to run their clock the way that they would see fit for their business. And Robert says, Chris, your shows have been on point. Keep the momentum. Got to go book loads. I love it, man. Thank you for the support, Robert. Truly, I appreciate that. And yeah, man, I got some freight moving here too. Going to go out there and make this stuff happen today. And I got this article actually sent to me from Cody, who was on the show yesterday. And this was from CNBC, and it was talking about retail sales tumbled 0.8% in January, which was much more than expected, and that consumer spending fell sharply in January. Advanced retail sales declined 0.8% for the month following in a 0.4 after a revised 0.4% gain in December. I look at something like that, and obviously people spend a lot more money in December because of the holiday or Christmas, excuse me. And obviously there would be a natural decline in January because everybody maxed out their credit cards around the holidays. But however, it says in this article, the pullback was considerably more than anticipated. Even excluding autos, sales dropped 0.6%, well below the estimated 0.2% gain that was out there. The sales report is adjusted for seasonal factors, but not for inflation. So inflation is real. Headline inflation rose 0.3% in January and 0.4% when excluding food and energy prices. Sales at building materials and garden stores were especially weak, sliding 4.1%. Miscellaneous store fell 3%, and motor vehicle parts and retailers saw a 1.7% decrease. Gas station sales declined 1.7% as prices at the pump dropped. Excuse me. I think it's interesting when it comes down to seeing about the building materials and garden stores sales sliding because, I mean, let's be honest, it's pretty much shitty weather on most of the country right now. So that kind of makes sense. But at the same time, I'm not trying to paint a picture of like any of this stuff is good by any stretch of the imagination. And then it goes on to say that it's weak. It's a weak report, but it's not fundamental shift out there, said Robert Frick with Navy Federal Credit Union. And December was high due to holiday shopping, and January saw drops in those spending categories and plus frigid weather out there. Initial claims of unemployment insurance totaled 212,000 for the week that ended February 10th, a decline of 8,000 from the previous week. Continuing claims, which run a week behind, totaled just a shy of 1.9 million, up 30,000 on the week and higher than a 1.88 million estimate. Okay, this is just my personal opinion. I think if you're not working right now, it's by choice. And I'm not saying that people don't get laid off and that you shouldn't take unemployment and stuff if you're due it and everything like that. But it seems like some of these numbers, because every store I go into is hiring right now, right? Like literally everyone that I go to has a hiring sign out there. So when I see that there's that high of unemployment numbers, yes, there is a percentage of people that can't work and everything else. And I'm not talking to them, but it seems like if you're not working right now, it's because you don't want to work. But anyways, that article was from CNBC talking about retail sales tumbling. Pay attention to those numbers, right? Because that has a lot to do with discretionary spending that's out there. And that is a direct tie to freight volumes and everything else. So when you're looking at the broader economy, you guys, these are also reports that you can look into to kind of see like where things are trending, where are things heading and everything else to make your decisions as you're going out there and prospecting for freight. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be it for today. Tomorrow, Q&A day. Okay. If you have any sales or operations related questions for the transportation industry, drop them in the chat. Or I was also thinking about doing something like this, you guys. Again, I'm not a subject matter expert in everything, but I've been in this industry for a very long time, as you know. What if we did a day of the week on like a live coaching call where we do, we choose a topic and there's a guest coming on. And if I'm not a subject matter expert in it, I can get somebody who is a subject matter expert on it, and you can come and ask pointed questions for that. I'm trying to think of a way to do it because the Q&A show is really popular. I get a ton of questions that are sent in throughout the week, but I'm also thinking about what's another way that we could give back. Maybe it's doing a live coaching call where we could go and we could work on our sales pitch live on the show if somebody would want to join out there. Or maybe if there's one of my friends that are drivers that wants help, learning about, a new factoring company or a new finance situation, that I could have one of my friends who does finance, I get my man James Courier to come on and maybe he can answer some of those questions live. What do you guys think about that? Let me know. DM me if you'd be interested in doing something like that, because again, the sole purpose of this show is to just add value and help people. And if you have any questions that you want answered, And even if you want to remain anonymous, everything can remain anonymous if you want at the end of the day. But if you want to do something like that where you want some actual live coaching, I'd be down to help out in any way with that one. Or if it's something on the asset side of things, I got plenty of people in my network where I can have them come on this show and we can do a live coaching call if you're on the asset side. Because again, assets aren't necessarily my strength, but I know a ton of people who work and have worked on the asset side and who have built up their fleets and everything else that I know would be more than happy to come on. So if you guys want something like that, DM that over to me, or you can email me direct, chris@thefreightcoach.com, and we can build up some shows that way. So, all right, you guys. Hey, Jim Coffrin said he'll join. I like it. Jim, I can't wait to talk to you, man. I responded to your DM this morning. I'd love to talk here soon. Uma says, I love that idea of a live coaching call. Let's do it. Why not, you guys? Let's make it happen. But that'll be it for today, you guys. As always, if you guys got value in what you heard, subscribe to the show. Share it out there to your network, because if you see value, your network's going to see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and we'll be talking to you soon.